What's up guys, my name is Vilu. I know it's been a while, but now I'm back with another video. And today I want to show you how I made this track, which was then signed to a sub-label of Hexagon. So for those of you who don't know Hexagon, it's the label of Don Diablo. But you can take a place tonight. And I think it's pretty well known in the dance music scene, kind of. So I didn't really expect this track to be signed there, but what can I say? Like, it was a nice, pleasant surprise, even though I think that nowadays a label isn't that big of a deal anymore as it used to be, especially if you're not like in one of these super big labels like Sony or Universal or whatever. However, I really like this track, so I want to share with you how I made it basically, and I hope you can learn something from it. So let's jump right into it. Still I fall, 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 fall. So the track starts off with these chords here, which are actually called Vilu Go-To because I use them in almost all of my tracks. It's such a nice harmonic bass. And it's just this very simple sine wave together with a saw wave without actually any processing on it. And then I found this amazing vocal on Splice. I need someone who understands, who's patient when I'm in my head. So as you can hear, it's a little harsh. So I added this Soothe plugin, which makes everything just a little bit more pleasant to listen to. I need someone who understands. This low cut who's patient when I'm in my head, and some reverb. Got me too damn scared. And that's like the base of this intro here, which is pretty short. I like to have my tracks pretty straightforward, like a short intro, short verse, and then straight to the drop. So far it sounds like this. I need someone who understands, who's patient when I'm in my head. So still a little bit empty. I added this play box. I need someone who understands. So I don't have a clue what this plugin is actually doing, but sometimes I get like a nice result. Yeah, and this was one of the times. So it is just some ambience in the background, nothing crazy. And then there's another layer of ambience. And then another element to fill up this mix here in the verse is this sample here. A little weird on its own right, but I thought it would fit really nice into here, and I just added a lot of low cuts as I wanted to get rid of this low end. And these elements together create like a nice layer for the track to start from. I need someone who understands, who's patient when I'm in my head. In the second part of the verse, the claps come in, as well as the first part of the melody. I will get to the melody a little bit later in the drop. Another part of the melody is this piano, which is also being filtered in. And I've also added some of these delays here to the vocal. So just some snippets from the main vocal with 100% of delay. And you guys can already see, like, this is pretty simple. There isn't any fill, like drum fill whatsoever. It just builds up by being filtered in, like all the elements are being filtered in. And this creates actually the energy that's needed for drop. So these thoughts got So let's have a look at the drop now. The drums sound like this. So the basic pattern is this kick here and this hat. So for this kick, I just added some minor adjustments like this EQ here, this EQ there, and this saturation plugin, which just clips the kick a little bit. And for the hat, I'm just widening the signal a little bit, as well as adding this little high boost here. So nothing crazy going on here. As the drop evolves, I'm adding more and more drum elements. So this top loop, for example, and then even more top loops. And these are already pretty good samples, so I don't need to mix them a lot or edit them in any kind of form, especially with elements that are a little bit more transient heavy, like this snare here. I like to clip them a little bit. So basically what I'm doing is I'm reducing the transient a little bit, but it's not really audible because of the soft saturation that's happening when I clip it. So in the end, I'm even soft clipping the entire drum group here. On to the melodic elements in the drop. So we've got this kind of call and response thing going on here. We've got the vocal layered with a piano. And then the response is this synth here. Let's have a look at the vocal first. So we've got the main layer that basically stays the same as in the verse. Then we've got a lower layer and a vocoder layer here, which I've also widened a little bit. So the vocals together sound like this. And the piano is this contact library, Noir. Pretty straightforward. I didn't even need to change the velocity here because it's kind of a in-your-face piano sound. And the piano chords actually just follow the vocal melody. The response is this serum patch here. Which is some crazy patch I found on Splice, I think. And I just added a little bit of this delay here. And that's the melody. Now, of course, I needed a bass, so I added this one here, which is like a very shuffly bass consisting out of two layers. The first layer is this one. Very simple one. To get this shuffle effect, I added this LFO to the level here, as well as to the cutoff. And then I just removed all of the low-end stereo image, and I even narrowed it down a little bit more with this imager here. And I've also added this kind of Pultec EQ curve here with the Ozone vintage EQ. So I'm boosting the lows, but I'm also cutting them at the same time to get this little curve here, which sounds quite powerful, especially for like bass instruments. And this layer here is then just a layer on top to give the whole thing a little bit more character. I'm also adding some tiny automations. So the first one is the frequency modulation amount here, just to add a little bit more of character to the whole sound, a little bit more of that movement. And then another thing I'm doing is I'm pitching up the main bass kind of up an octave here, just to create a little bit more tension before the second part of the drop. Just very basic stuff, but it keeps the listener engaged. It keeps the music interesting. So that's everything that's happening in the first part of the drop here. And in the second part of the drop, I had to switch things up a little bit. Otherwise, it would have just been very boring to listen to. So let's take a listen now. So as I've already mentioned before, I'm adding these drums here, but the new element is this lead here. And it consists out of 3 layers. So we've got a supersaw layer. Very simple, it's just a detuned saw wave. Then we've got this organ here, which acts as a little middle ground of the sound here. And then we've got this very phasey lead. With a ton of effects on it, like a reverb and even some delay. But this gives it like this whole stereo information, which is really nice to have in this section of the drop. On the group bus, I'm just adding a low cut. I'm saturating the lead slightly and I'm compressing them a little bit to just glue them together. And by the way, if you're wondering like where is the sidechain coming from, I actually put almost all of the musical elements into this big folder and added a sidechain automation here. Makes things just much easier so I don't have to drag the sidechain plugin on each track. Right, so that's almost it for the second part of the drop. So another tiny thing I'm doing is that I'm adding this delayed vocal in between the sections where the lead is playing, like this. And that's the second part of the drop. So let's move on to the break now. Okay, so in the break here, we have this ambience from before. We've got this pad. With this filter automation at the end. As always, there are these chords. And I've also added this plucky thing here. But I think the most interesting part of this break is the vocal or the vocal chops. They sound like this. So the initial situation for me was that I had these vocals. But they just last for like, I don't know, 4 or 5 bars. And somehow it's always a little bit challenging to take this vocal and keep it interesting throughout the track. So I've tried to do this by just chopping it up. And then adding a lot of effects like the reverb. This is the mix of the reverb, this curve. Another thing I automated was the balance of this utility here. So whether it's playing on the left or on the right ear. Just to give a little bit of this spatial character. I've also added a kickstart to this section here. So all this does is create that ducking effect. Without, it would be like this. And then I'm also filtering the signal so it gets thinner and thinner. So together with these techniques, let's say, this vocal suddenly sounds quite different and more interesting in my opinion. In this section here, I'm adding this delay layer again, and I'm just pitching up some of these chops here. And here I'm adding this little stuttery effect to the reverb mostly. Again, just to add some little nice variations. And then this whole section leads again back to the original vocal. Still I fall. Here I'm again adding a little bit of that stutter effect, and I'm continuously increasing the mix of the reverb to create this washout effect. Still I fall. So what I'm trying to do here is to create this contrast between this washed out vocal and then afterwards the very dry vocal, which is like in your face without any reverb. And I transition these two parts with this backspin. Otherwise, there aren't many new parts in this break, so we've got this weird little texture again. We've got a slightly quieter kick in the beginning. When I'm pitching up the vocal here, I'm also adding this vocoder layer. And this layer here is just a little melody in the background, just again to add some character to the whole breakdown. And just before that pre-drop section here, I'm adding the piano. And that's everything that's happening in the break. Moving on to the second drop now. It basically stays the same. I've just added some more layers to it to thicken it up. So the first layer I've added was this one. And this layer just adds something. I can't really tell what it is, and you don't really hear it if you don't actively try to hear it, but it adds just this little extra of energy. And the second layer I'm adding after 8 bars is this one here, which kind of complements the first layer we've added here. Just a little bit more of that sparkly tone on the top. And the last layer I've added for this section here is this guitar, which I recorded myself. And then I took out the best bits and recreated that main melody. And the rest is pretty much the same as in the first drop, at least for this section here. So these two are pretty identical. In the end of the second drop though, I've added these vocal chops. So I've cut out the lead that was playing before and I replaced it with some vocal chops. We've got the main layer here and a high-pitched layer. A very distorted high-pitched layer, I must say. And that's the whole track. Pretty simple, but I like to have like simple ideas and then build the whole track around it. You can stream the song now on all the common streaming services, so I'll put a link in the description below. Thank you so much for watching and we see each other next time. Bye bye.